order for cold calling to work, people have to pick up the phone. They have to pick up the phone and you have to be ready for the conversation if they do pick up the phone. But if they don't pick up the phone, then you're kind of left with a sort of predicament. And a lot of people are saying that connection rates, meaning the amount of times people actually pick up the phone, are going down. And I wanted to ask you, as a leader and as someone who's been cold calling for a while, is this fact or myth that connection rates in cold calling are decreasing?
It's a good way to put it because, you know, there's a lot of different talking heads out there saying certain things about conversation rates. And as someone who's looking at conversation rates every day for every industry, I have an insight that I think most people don't have because we see it along such a broad scope of different industries. And I would say the biggest thing is that conversation rates or connect rates are changing. And
Mm,
so some uh, directions, it's definitely lower. And whether that's because of the remote world and everyone going remote after COVID, and there's less kind of like hard phone lines, company phone lines available to be transferred to, or whether it's because there's fatigue, you know, or saturation to a specific market, there have been some that have been lowered. On the other hand, though, we've seen some markets increase or be more apt to pick up the phone, and that could be a growing industry. That could be the fact that they're smaller businesses and the owner or somebody is nearby and they have to be able to pick up the phone for customers. Also, some folks are getting sick of email, and so they're actually open to having conversation. And one thing to note recently is that some of the appointments we've set, and I don't think I've seen this in the 8 years that I've been doing this, some appointments are much more open to learning about a product or service just by sheer talking about the topic in the first 15, 20 seconds. It's almost
mhm,
as if they were looking for that product or service and they were excited to talk to a human. And we've
mm.
actually put some of those calls on our YouTube page to hear because it's just awesome to see that, the phone actually working in the way that it was originally designed to, where there's less stigma and there's less negativity towards a salesperson, actually positivity towards hearing someone call out.
That's incredible. I like how you put that. The connection rates are changing. And in general, when we think of markets and selling in general, it's always going to be changing. And it's important for the person who is calling or the person who is selling to just pick up on the nuances of what's happening in their specific market, not just go and look on LinkedIn or read the latest book and say, "Oh, cold calling doesn't work." I think it's just encouraging to hear like, "Hey, it's different in every industry. It's always changing. Pick up the phone, try it yourself for 90 days and see what type of results you get and stick with it."
And I think that there's, even more layers than just noting that the, industries have changed. Another thing is that sometimes it is up to the caller to increase their connection rates. What's
Mm,
interesting that we see at Superhuman is there is a relative correlation between how good you are at calling, how many appointments or leads you have, and the number of conversations you have. It's not always true, but the folks who have the most leads and appointments also seem to have higher connection rates.
that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of, a misnomer that connection rates are all about the data. It's
Right.
not always about the data. I think
Right.
taking responsibility for what happens on the phone starts with the ability or capacity to get to a human.
Hmm.
And if you can navigate the phone correctly to talk to a human, then you have more influence in getting to that right person.
It can depend on how your sequence is set up. So how many times are you calling the specific person and the types of voicemails you leave, how many times you leave the voicemails, and just your demeanor and tone in those voicemails. Because if
Yeah.
you do call the person over and over again, they're going to get to start to know your phone number. So you're right. It is up to the rep too to take hold of their own connection rates and how often people pick up. So that's something good to know.
And that's a great point too in the voicemails. How good of a voicemail are you leaving? Are you just trying to blaze through it, or are you actually saying something interesting that would potentially spark them to take that phone and pick it back up rather than block your number?
Exactly.
So voicemails, gatekeeper conversations, so much more influence than you think, because a lot of times if they do have some type of influence, they're going to mask it by asking operator or secretary questions.
Hmm.
But if you can treat them like a decision maker or someone who matters, many times they can reveal the right person, or even better, they might be a stakeholder or someone who has the capacity to take that meeting with you. And if you don't treat them seriously, they're not going to take you seriously.
And it's hard to understand what message and words to use when it
Yeah.
comes to saying the right thing over voicemail, and saying the right thing to gatekeepers, which is one of the reasons I love Trust Call and H to H. So would definitely encourage everyone to pick that up and give it a read, because the scripts that you all have in there is one of a kind.
Well, thank you. And I think like partnering you with on Suade has the capacity to then give some of these answers, these words, like these conversation tips in real time, so that you have a head start and an accelerated success there using what we've seen successful, through this platform that's going to be available.
Exactly. Exactly. Excited for it. I remember you mentioning to me that you found a tool that helped increase your connection rates, and they had some sort of AI involved in that. And I just popped in my mind. I'm like, oh, I want to ask him that question. So tell me a little bit more about that. I'm really curious.
Yeah, so I like this two separate kind of conversations, because I think one is about the raw conversions of connection rates. If you were to
Hmm.
call manually or with an auto dialer, what would be kind of those connection rates just with the data that's available as we collect it through the different sources that we have? Just recently, over the last year or so, there's been the development of kind of agent assisted, whether human or AI based conversation rates increased. And so there's teams out there who, whether through using human means or AI, are able to identify who is most likely to pick up the phone through a larger data set, trim that down to those who are most likely to pick up the phone, and just call those numbers. We've partnered with an AI team, Share Connect. Go check them out. Laxman's amazing. He's always posting cold calls with his kids. And they're becoming very successful at like age 9. Also, the reason why we know him is because he's the CEO of Outplay, which is kind of like an outreach competitor or
Hmm.
similar platform. And so we use that internally. So we're one of the first to be on this. And he uses AI with a team to identify who's most likely to pick up the phone. And so we can run those numbers through, and it ranks it P1 to P4, P1 being the most likely to pick up, P4 being the least likely, and then typically rank kind of those 1 to 3. And we're seeing connection rates from 3 to 10% on raw. So
Hmm.
without them, we're seeing 3 to 10, sometimes more for sure.
Hmm.
Um, but with his, seeing somewhere between 8 and 25
Wow.
uh, in
That's
there.
incredible.
So it can really increase that, because you're just calling those who are most likely and willing to talk to you.
Awesome. Well, I got to check it out, because you got to be sure about who you're connecting with. Awesome. Well, great talking with you. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.